You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is 11/11/21. Well, much going on. We've got Build Back Better. Is it going to happen, or is it going to be beaten back better? That's the question. We've got inflation. We've got the infrastructure bill and so many other things. And here to discuss with us is Professor of Economics, Michael Busler at Stockton College. It's great to have you back on the show, Professor.
Well, thanks for having me, Kerry. It's my pleasure to be here.
So Build Back Better, maybe not so much better, huh?
No, I'll tell you, if you don't mind, I'd like to just mention inflation first, because that'll lead into some of these other things. So the inflation number for October came out yesterday, 0.9% in 1 month. That means that prices in the last year have gone up from October 2020 to October 2021, have gone up 6.2%, the highest inflation we've seen in about 30 years. The Biden administration and the Federal Reserve both believe that this is transitory or temporary. And once the supply chain problems are resolved, the inflation will go away. I disagree with that, because there are 4 other reasons why we have inflation unrelated to the supply chain. What are they? Number one, the Biden administration wants America to use renewable energy rather than fossil fuels. To encourage that, they want the price of fossil fuels to increase so that there won't be much of a premium to go to renewables, and I think people will go to renewables. And they've caused the price of fossil fuels to increase by restricting the supply of fossil fuels, and they've done that by canceling the Keystone Pipeline, prohibiting drilling on federal land, and stop the drilling off the coast of Alaska. The restriction in supply at a time when the economy is growing and demand is going up means energy prices will rise, and as that happens, not only do we pay more for gasoline and heating oil, but manufacturers pay more for energy to make their products. That's inflationary, and retailers will pay more because trucks have to pay more for fuel to bring the goods in. So energy inflation is here to stay based on the current policy. Secondly, we have a wage inflation problem. For whatever reason, there's about 3 million, a little over 3 million workers who have left the job market during COVID and are not returning to the job market. That's creating a labor shortage, and it's mostly with lower income, lower wage workers. In order to get those workers back, businesses had to raise the starting wage of these workers. And once you raise the starting wage, the person that's been there for a year or two said, look, I'm worth more than the new person, so I want to raise too. We end up with this wage inflation problem, and that's going to continue. Thirdly, and this leads into the Build Back Better plan, the federal government has spent $6 trillion more than they brought in tax revenue in the last 2 years. That's highly inflationary. And they're talking about this infrastructure bill, which is about to be signed for $1.2 trillion, and this Build Back Better plan, which is another $1.8 trillion. That will put the federal government in a very deep hole. And the first thing, if you're stuck in a deep hole, the first thing you want to do is stop digging. So these things should not be passed at this time. Whether there's some good to be done in there or not, this is simply not the time to do that. So the third reason is excess government spending. The fourth reason, and this is shocking to me, the Federal Reserve continues to increase the money supply by printing $120 billion more every month, and they use the money to purchase government bonds. That's increased the money supply by more than 20% in the last 12 months. Under any definition, that too is highly inflationary, simply because you have too many dollars chasing too few goods. They've also kept interest rates near zero, and that's encouraging people to borrow money for things that you typically buy on credit, like cars and houses. So even when the supply chain issue is resolved, you're still going to have energy inflation, wage inflation, excess government spending, and a very loose monetary policy. Those are what's causing inflation. And I'm very nervous about how high inflation will go in the coming months because it looks like none of those policies are going to be reversed.
In fact, it's due to get worse because we were supposed to have the taper, and that was Jerome Powell, Fed Chair Powell's brainchild here. And now when the president was asked if he was going to reappoint Powell, he hedged, he hemmed, and he hawed, and then he had a meeting with Powell and this guy Brainard, who's even more of a dove than Powell, at the White House. So we might very well see a replacement of the Fed chief who's even more dovish than he is.
Yeah, and I'm afraid of that too. And I guess politics is coming into play here because Chairman Powell says that, look, I've got to be accommodating to what the president wants to do. Otherwise, there's no chance he's going to reappoint me in February. So I think some of his actions may be politically motivated rather than economically motivated. For the last 40 years, since the Federal Reserve has begun to monitor the money supply in order to control inflation, and they've been very successful over the last 40 years, except for a few years here and there. Inflation has been primarily under 3% a year. The last year, the prior administration was down to 1.8%. Usually, if there's any hint of inflation, even a hint of inflation, the Federal Reserve will be out in front of it, as they were in 2016. Between 2016 and 2018, because there was a hint of inflation, they raised interest rates 8 times, a quarter of a point each time, over that 2-year period. And they felt that was enough to take demand out of the economy. So we had no inflation or low inflation, but it didn't hurt economic growth. This is the first time in 40 years they're not out in front of inflation. And when they finally are going to have to act to do something, I'm afraid their actions will be very drastic and will have to come very quickly. And if that's the case, which is the problem we ran into in 1981, that leads to a recession. So we could end up having a stagnant economy with inflation. That's called stagflation. And again, that's something we haven't seen since the late 1970s.
Michael, one of the things that I have taken note of is you and I were alive and well, maybe not as advanced in years as we are now, during the 70s when we had our last bout of inflation. And back then, people weren't as knowledgeable. You didn't really understand that inflation, as Milton Friedman said, is first and foremost always a monetary phenomena. Yes. And most of the world's population, Michael, was not alive during the 70s for this bout of inflation. So they're getting re-educated on inflation quickly. However, they might be taking the wrong lessons from the current bout that you and I learned on the last bout.
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Silver One Resources is an exploration and development company backed by strategic investors Eric Sprott and SSR Mining. At Silver One's Candelaria Mine project in Nevada, there is already a historic resource estimated at 127 million ounces of silver, which Silver One is developing and advancing. The company's Phoenix Silver project, located within the Arizona Silver Belt, is an early-stage exploration project on which native silver vein fragments have been discovered near surface. One grab sample assayed an astounding 14,688 ounces per ton. Yes, that's right, ounces, not grams. Silver One has tremendous exploration potential, is extremely leveraged to the price of silver, and is cashed up and poised to increase shareholder value. Silver One trades in New York under the ticker SLVRF and in Toronto under the ticker SVE. To learn more, go to silverone.com. That's silverone.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network, the information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Yeah, and I wish they could take these lessons by doing something in a classroom or listening to somebody speak rather than taking these lessons by having to experience this. Because this inflation is a very nasty thing, it ends up hurting the lowest income earners. Why? Because they have to spend all of their income after taxes. Wealthy people, higher income earners, don't spend all of their disposable income. They end up saving or investing some of it. So there is some inflation on the consumption side. They don't feel it quite as much as a lower income earner who spends all of their disposable income. And as a result, they feel the higher prices more. It's like a regressive tax is what inflation is. And it turns out to be horrible because once prices start to go up, people say, hey, look, if I'm going to get a wage increase, I need a wage increase that's higher than the inflation rate if I'm really going to get an increase. Look at John Deere. Their workers have gotten 2-3% raises annually for the last decade. John Deere offered them 6% next year and 5% the year after. Not only did they turn it down, they went on strike. And they said, look, if inflation's running 6%, I need an 8% raise just to come out ahead. So 5-6% is not enough. Where that leads, eventually they'll resolve this at some wage increase. But as wages tend to go up, then business says, look, my labor costs just went up. I have to raise prices to cover that. Then inflation gets a little higher. So labor comes back again and says, now I need an even bigger wage increase to keep up with this. And you get into a very nasty, what economists refer to as a wage price spiral. And that's also where I'm very fearful that we're heading now, as much of labor now is talking about going on strike and demanding more higher wages because this inflation rate is so high. And if they keep doing that, the strikes obviously slow down production, tend to stagnate the economy, and higher wages. While I hope everybody makes as much money as they can. I'm not against that. But you make more money by producing more and increasing your productivity, not simply by saying I need more because the prices are higher. Our system is not based on need. Communism is based on need. You contribute according to ability, you're paid according to need. Our system, you contribute according to ability, you're paid according to the value of your contribution. So if you want to get a raise, you figure out how to produce more, increase your productivity, or do something, and you're deemed worthy of a raise at that point. The way we have it now, this wage price spiral could be very nasty going into the future.
Hey, you want to increase your value, always invest in human capital, maybe take a couple of Professor Busler's courses, and that in itself is going to add value to your life and your labor. No, but seriously, people don't really understand this. They think that money grows at the Fed on trees and digital trees that get harvested, and you just get more money when you need it. And it really skews everything in society and really has the net effect of making everybody poorer. One thing I want to point out, though, is as we know, the people who benefit most from inflation are the ones who get the money before it loses value. And those are the banks and the wealthy hedge funds and the people with good credit ratings. We know from the 70s it was a great time to be a debtor, because you maybe started out the decade with a $400 a month mortgage payment. And if you kept that same house, by the end of the decade, the equivalent house would have over $1,000 a month mortgage payment. And as a percentage of your net income, your debt had decreased greatly. So that's another thing that inflation encourages profligate behavior. It encourages people to take on more debt and save less in the hopes that they're going to cash in on an inflation dividend. And even at 3% a year interest, which maybe we had and maybe we didn't, but at 3% interest, you still get benefits from being a debtor as opposed to a saver.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so the inflation will alter people's behavior, make them take on more debt because, as you say, you can pay the debt back with cheaper dollars. The Biden administration, a lot of their policies are causing this bad consumer behavior. Look, the Biden keeps giving people free money. And as long as you keep giving people free money, stimulus packages and child tax credits, and we're going to pay for your health insurance. And as long as you start giving people free money, they start to expect the free money. And they said, well, I don't have to go out and earn it. They're going to give it to me for free. Look, we have a labor shortage in this country, mostly with lower wage workers. The ones I don't have any hard data here, but the ones that I talk to, they tell me, they said, look, I got unemployed. I haven't been working for a year and a half. I got unemployed. I collected unemployment compensation from the state. The federal government added $600 a week to that. And when that ran out, they made it $300 a week they added to it. And in addition, I haven't paid my rent in the last year and a half, and they can't evict me because we had a moratorium on. I live in New Jersey. The moratorium's on until January. And even when the moratorium comes off, there's so much activity in the courts, it could take another 5 or 6 months to be evicted. So I'm not going back to work. And as long as all this money, and I've been able to save a lot of this free money from the government because I haven't been paying my rent. So as long as this money lasts and I can live rent free, I'm not going back to work. I kind of like it not having to work for the last year and a half. So the Biden administration policies are causing bad behavior in consumers because of inflation and in lower wage workers because the free money discourages them from going back to work.
Yeah, it's all a big mess and we're not going to solve it. But eventually the economic forces, the laws of economics are going to take precedence. They're going to solve this. Michael, if you're Joe Sixpack, you got a job. Thank goodness you were able to keep it during the global health concerns. And hopefully you're keeping up with inflation or trying to. What do you tell that person to do? What is the best thing that Joe Sixpack can do for the good of their family and themselves and their own economic health?
So it's a hard thing when you have inflation. If you are a homeowner, you're going to be in better shape than somebody who's not a homeowner because home prices usually go up in value a little more than the inflation rate. If you have some money invested in the stock market, usually the stock prices will go up more than the inflation rate. Now, for the average person who may not have all that, the best you can do is when they raise prices, when you see prices going up, don't just automatically pay them. Try to look for some alternatives. And I'm not suggesting you need to have a dramatic reduction in your standard of living, but if the price of something is going up, try to see if there are some substitute products rather than just going ahead and pay the price. If people keep paying the price, there will continue to be more inflation. If people become resistant to it, there's likely to be less inflation. So just try to be very careful the way you spend money if inflation ends up getting any worse than it is.
Yeah, so that's the old classic substitution principle. If you're used to having steak 3 times a week, try to have chicken twice a week. You'll save that money, and maybe the price of steak will go down because of reduced demand. We really appreciate your coming on, Professor Busler. Just tell us, best place to find your work is still Newsmax. Do I remember that? Newsmax.com?
Yeah. And I write for a couple other websites. So if you want to see all my work, I tweet out every one of my columns. So my Twitter is at mbusler. That's at mbusler. And if you have a Facebook page, I post all my columns. My page is called Funding Democracy. Funding Democracy. So if you're on Facebook, just search for Funding Democracy. My page will come up, and I'd be very happy if anybody followed me.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor. Appreciate it. Always like having you on. And if you got a question for the good professor, just shoot us an email to kl@kerrylutz.com. We'll get you an answer. And Professor, we'll talk to you again real soon.
Thank you, Kerry. Look forward to doing it again.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.